Laura, are we all ready to go at 6:30?
We are ready to go.
Great, thanks. All right, it is 6:30. I will call to order the meeting of the Cherry Hills Village City Council on Tuesday, March 16th, 2021. This is a regular meeting. Roll call of members, please, Laura.
Counselor Safavi,
Here.
Counselor Wheel,
Glad to be here.
Counselor Brown,
Here.
Counselor Gallagher,
Here.
Counselor Sheldon is absent, Counselor Blum.
Here.
All right, we have audience participation and we have two speakers, I believe.
Yes, first we have Laura Chrisman.
All right. Laura, you're on.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Want to take a minute to address e-bikes this evening, and first and foremost to thank council for being proactive on this issue. I think frequently cities are reactive, and I think it speaks well of you that you were proactive in having Parks and Trails address this issue. Couple items I wanted to bring to your attention is that trail management studies show that less aggressive users of trails will essentially stop using trails when there are aggressive users. So we in the village, I think, would qualify ourselves as less aggressive. And I think it's interesting that people don't actually call the police or anything else. They just stop using trails. So I think that's an important piece of information to have. Another important piece of information I would like council to have is that Lime, which is the company that does the green scooters, last year, 2020, bought Jump, which is an e-bike company. And they started rolling out the Jump e-bikes in August as a test. It has gone well. They are going to continue come spring to move very aggressively to distribute e-bikes throughout the greater Denver area in their targeted areas. E-bikes are wonderful for first and last mile transportation issues. But I do think that we need to be aware that there could be a large contingency of rental e-bikes entering the village, and we will need to be proactive on enforcement. Those same studies that I was talking about said that posting speed limits, posting that they will be enforced, which I thought was interesting, and also posting large and clear indication as to who has right of way is important in controlling more aggressive trail behaviors. So that being said, I want to thank you again for looking at this issue and taking it seriously and listening to all the citizens who also take it seriously. Thank you. That's it. You can unmute me or mute me.
Thank you, Mayor Chrisman. We appreciate your comments. Next speaker, Judith Judd.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I unmuted myself. Well, I want to take only a very short minute of your time first to pass out a rave. I was so impressed the way Emily worked so hard to get all the comments in. There was a ton of comments, and she had to figure out other ways to get them to the committee. And she managed to do that. And I think everybody who spoke at the commission meeting felt like we had a fair chance to be heard. And it was a wonderful feeling to be a citizen of Cherry Hills Village with such a responsive situation and everybody trying to bend over to be fair. And also I want to compliment her on the memorandum that she prepared. Again, I feel like she, with all the attachments, she transcribed somehow everybody's comments in a really accurate and fair way. So that's a rave. And you know, you don't have enough chance to give a rave. But the other thing, I guess I just want to underscore everything Laura said, and that we are under such density pressure to our north, to our south, everywhere. And I do think it's a little bit of a mischaracterization to say that everybody else is allowing e-bikes, which Emily didn't quite say, but I just wanted to point out in all of Summit County, they're not allowing e-bikes on unpaved trails, only on the specially prepared trails. So those of us who spoke about caution in going in this direction have very serious concerns, which I know you'll take into consideration, but thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your comments. We appreciate those. All right. That takes care of audience participation. And I don't think we have anybody on from boards and commissions or committees.
No, we do not.
So we'll move on to the consent agenda,
Oh,
item
well,
5A.
Sorry, except for PTRC Chair Dahl.
Say that again.
PTRC Chair Stephanie Dahl is on the line, but I don't know if she has a report
Okay.
exactly.
She will.
Yeah.
She will when we get to the other item.
Okay, great. We'll reserve her comments for that until the item of interest comes up. We'll move then to consent agenda items 5A through C. Does anyone wish any removed?
Yes, would you remove consent agenda 5, items 5C?
Item 5C, we'll remove that one. Any others?
I move
If not-
approval of consent agenda items 5A and 5B.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. We need a roll call.
Counselor Safavi?
Yes.
Counselor Wheel?
Yes.
Counselor Brown?
Yes.
Counselor Gallagher?
Yes.
Counselor Blum?
Yes.
All right, move on to item 6, which is items removed. Councilor
Yep.
Gallagher.
Yes, the purpose of removing this item was just to recognize the anonymous, two generous donations from an anonymous party here in the village. And the first being the $26,000 cost of the sideways tree climber for John Mead Park playground. And then secondly, the floating duck house that would be used in either John Mead Park Pond or Quincy Farm Pond. But these are wonderful donations that will contribute to our community, and thanks to this anonymous donor. With that, I would like to make a motion to approve consent agenda 5C.
Second.
Motion and second. Again, any discussion first?
I would just ditto Mike's comments. We are so fortunate in this community to have such generous members of our community, and really want those people and individuals to know how much we appreciate it and how much the entire community benefits from their generosity.
All right, then no more comments. I'll call for a vote. Laura?
Counselor Safavi?
Yes.
Counselor Wheel?
Yes.
Counselor Brown?
Yes.
Counselor Gallagher?
Yes.
Counselor Blum?
Yes.
All right, next item on the agenda is item 7A, Council Bill 2, Series 2021, authorizing a supplemental appropriation in the Arapahoe County Open Space Fund for fiscal year 2021 for the Hampton Underpass Trail connection. And this is a second and final reading. Coordinator Black.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. I just have a brief presentation. I won't go through everything I did last time. Just to recap, this is not a request for additional project funds. It's just an administrative cleanup to allocate the approved funds for this underpass project to the correct fiscal year. There haven't been any changes to this item since council reviewed it and approved the bill on first reading. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
All right, I'll do this. I'll throw it open to questions if anybody wants to unmute and have a question, since I don't anticipate a lot. Are there any questions from council members?
Nope, not me.
If there are no questions, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve Council Bill 2, Series 2021, authorizing a supplemental appropriation in the Arapahoe County Open Space Fund for fiscal year 2021 for the Hampton Underpass Trail connection on second and final reading.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Councilor Blum. Any discussion? Hearing none. Laura, could you take a roll call?
Counselor Safavi,
Yes.
Counselor Wheel,
Yes.
Counselor Brown,
Yes.
Counselor Gallagher,
Yes.
Counselor Blum.
Yes.
The next item is item 7B, which is informational only. It's no action on behalf of council, but informational only regarding the Parks, Trails, and Recreation Commission. It's an update regarding motorized vehicle use on trails related to temporary access and e-bikes particularly. Again, Coordinator Black, would you give us an update?
Absolutely. So I'm going to provide a little bit of background on these issues, and then we do have PTRC Chair Stephanie Dahl to talk about the two recommendations. So the first issue that PTRC considered regarding motorized vehicles on trails was related to temporary permitting. If you'll recall, last summer, both PTRC and council considered a request for a revocable license agreement by a private homeowner for motorized use on a city trail. So City Council denied that request for a revocable license, but directed PTRC and staff at that point to research this section of the municipal code and consider developing a policy for appropriate motorized vehicle use on trails. So at their January meeting, PTRC considered whether to create a temporary permitting system that would be separate from the city's existing right-of-way permit system to allow private homeowners vehicular access to trails. The second issue that PTRC considered was whether to allow e-bikes on city trails. The commission formally discussed this question at their November and January meetings and then requested public feedback specifically for the February meeting. The commission received over 100 letters from residents. All of those are included in your packet in different batches. I want to thank Judith Judd for her kind words earlier. That was very nice of you to say. I do want to credit Pamela Broyles, our admin assistant in Public Works. She's the one that wrote those really excellent minutes for all those speakers that PTRC heard. PTRC also at that meeting, at all three meetings, or across three meetings, heard from Cherry Hills Police Department, the nonprofit Bicycle Colorado, and the Highline Canal Conservancy. So rather than me summarizing PTRC's discussions, I'm going to open it up for Chair Dahl to talk about the two recommendations.
Thank you very much, Emily. Mayor, councilors, it's good to see you all this evening. And first, in regards to the permit, PTRC had a lengthy discussion, and the feedback that we came down to and why we decided not to move forward with creating a permitting system really had a number of factors that played into it. I think one of the most prevalent ones is, and you will see it is kind of an overarching theme into the e-bike discussion as well, is that, we are rural, and that is why our residents buy homes here. They buy them for, the parks, the trails that, we are rural within the city, I guess is a good way to put it. And it's very important in that kind of tranquility for our residents. And so when we looked at the permitting, one of the things that came up with regards to the parks and trails is that for our homeowners, when they buy, they are well aware of the homes, the access to the homes, what they will need and what they're going to do on the property. And so to allow for a permitting system that allows for people multiple times a year or once a year or whenever it is to use the trails for motorized vehicles, it really disturbs the sanctity of the trails. And why our residents are out on the trails and what they're doing. And so we felt that the current system that's in place, that if in case of emergency, if there's a necessity, that the city can look into it, and that there's the bond placed and different kind of safeguards in place. But to allow a permitting system that could be abused, it didn't outweigh the responsibility I think we have to our residents of ensuring kind of that sanctity and that preservation of trails and rural system. So that's ultimately why on that issue, we declined to move forward with creating a permitting system. So before I move on to the e-bikes, are there any questions from any of you on that? No. Emily, anything I'm missing that you want me to add on that?
No, I think that was a good summary.
Okay, perfect. So moving on to the e-bikes, as Emily said, bless Emily and Pamela for putting together the multitude of emails and letters and everything they received, and timely getting it to everybody on the commission so that we could review it prior to the hearing. Prior to our commission meeting. And I can tell the council that we have been discussing this very peripherally for probably a year or two. It's kind of peeked its way in. And so, the discussions we've had leading up to this, and I can tell you it has gone back and forth. We have had discussions regarding e-bikes are here. Like, why are we fighting this? Also to kind of, as I said, the overarching theme of why people purchase homes in Cherry Hills, why people come and utilize our trails. And really, if you've all had a chance to look at all the comments, there was an overwhelming feeling from our community that they wanted to preserve those trails. And there was discussion, just so everybody is aware, because a lot of the feedback that we heard in terms of some of our residents who were pro having e-bikes on the trails came from a place of, I've had an injury, I've had, I have a disability, and this allows me to get out. And so we also had discussions and were provided guidance around the ADA, and that obviously that would trump anything that we can do. And so those vehicles, or the bicycles, the e-bikes, can be used for ADA compliance and things like that. So that wasn't prohibiting any of that group who would be able to still utilize our trails with those. I will say that I think one thing we were able to flesh out of this whole discussion was that speed on our trails is an issue. And I don't think anyone was ever able to delineate e-bike versus just people on a pedal bike who go really fast. I think a lot of everyone on the commission, as well as other residents who spoke, had said, speed is an issue. They've had interactions, and it was hard for people to say whether that was an e-bike or a non-e-bike. And so while that factored into our discussion, it was not the reason we prohibited it. We declined to move forward with a recommendation to change the municipal code. We had, I believe, a lieutenant and from Cherry Hills Police Department. I cannot remember, a sergeant and a lieutenant, maybe, Emily?
Sergeant Stremmel and Sergeant Rolfing.
Thank you. They were kind enough to come and just talk with us a little bit about the feasibility of enforcement and different things like that. And ultimately at this time, for more enforcement, we would need to have discussion about more funding or taking away from other enforcement. And that wasn't something that obviously we were tasked with or to look at. But just so you all know, we kind of removed the speed issue from this because we couldn't tell what that speed was from. So really what we looked at was, do we want e-bikes and kind of the slippery slope of e-bikes, golf carts, the scooters, all of these different things on our trails. And we heard from everyone that Emily had discussed with you all. And really what it came down to is kind of the same thing with the permitting, is that we, the residents here that we heard from, I think it was over about 70% said no, they did not want e-bikes on our trails. There was also the delineation, just so you all are aware, that e-bikes or anything motorized on our paved trails, right on next to our streets and things like that, are allowed because they are a part of the street. And Emily's shaking her head, so I think I said that correctly. But we're talking about kind of our unpaved, our bridle trails, things of that nature. And really it came down to, again, preserving the sanctity of why people go out on the trails and why they're out there. And we understand that people will ride through, and there are going to be people on e-bikes and things of that nature. And so, you know, we just felt like at this time, based on the feedback from our residents, there was nothing that was provided to us that we felt really necessitated a change to a recommendation to change the municipal code at this point. And based on those things, we declined to move forward with making any recommendations to change the municipal code to allow for e-bikes on our trails. So I'm happy to answer any questions on that, or if Emily, I need to add anything to that, please let me know.
Very good. Thank you very much, Stephanie. Appreciate it. I can go down the line here if you want to. Councillor, any questions? Councillor Blum? You're on mute, Al. Al, you're on mute.
I'm unmuted, I think. You addressed this ADA compliance. And my question on that is, because we read a bunch of letters where people may have had an injury or they're just elderly and they use the bikes. What was the advice you received? And can you be more specific on what the ADA rules are as far as providing access to the e-bikes?
Well, I will not speak to the ADA and like recommendations, but what I can tell you is the information that we were given. And Emily, you can, I think, probably provide a little more clarity on this, but that if somebody had some sort of disability that was covered under the ADA, though the ADA covers electronic or motorized, I guess, I don't know what the exact term is. I don't want to say vehicles because that's not the right word, but devices that allow you to, that if you were covered under the ADA, you could have an e-bike on the trail. That was my understanding. And I'll let Emily jump in because she probably has a little bit more information on this.
Sure. So there's two separate things really. The way our code is written, it does allow motorized devices to be used if they're being used for accessibility reasons. The ADA has specific guidance that I'll give my best summary, but there's many pages of guidance on this. If you dive into it, basically any motorized device or power-driven device that's being used as a mobility aid would be allowed on our trails. There are very, very limited times that facilities or governments or an organization could say these specific types aren't allowed, like a golf cart might be too much, for example, in a building that has hallways that are only so wide. But generally speaking, to be in compliance, we need to allow people using any type of motorized device, if they have a disability and that's the reason they're using it, to use the trail with that device, to be able to provide them the same access to the trail that everybody has.
And the reason that came up, Councillor Blum, is because we were having discussions regarding kind of carving out an exception to this, in that can we put within the municipal code that we allow for e-bikes for purposes of right? People who may need them for mobility. And that's where this discussion regarding the ADA and what was allowed under the ADA and things like that came in. So it, based on the information provided to us, seemed duplicative to carve out an additional exception because our code and the ADA have already provided those exceptions.
Okay, I just think it's going to be very difficult to monitor that. It seems to me inconsistent that somebody would be using an e-bike for mobility. It would seem they'd use something other. And we did have one instance, I think we talked about possibility of a three-wheeled e-bike that may comply for that. I just think that's a very difficult. I've looked at the ADA. I think it's very difficult for us to comply with that, depending on what the usage is. The other question I got, maybe just for Emily, what is the speed limit on our trails?
15 miles an hour.
Okay. All right, that was it.
Thank you, Councilor Blum. Councilor Gallagher.
Is this the time that should we address our questions specifically to Stephanie? Or are we going to have time for a general discussion in addition to this?
I think we have the discussion now and address them to Stephanie. I mean, we're not going to take any action on this, so go ahead, Mike.
Okay. Stephanie, your group did a really good job, and some very thoughtful comments came out of your different members, and I appreciated where Aaron came from, and he's calling a spade a spade. It's right. The horse is out of the barn. There's no question about that. But I think the broader discussion is the items that Harriet talked about, and the discussion of biker etiquette, whether it's an electronic bike or whether it's a self-propelled bike, doesn't matter. They both can go very fast, and we've seen them go very fast. And so then, for me, the broader discussion is etiquette on our trails as we see more and more pressure. And then how do we address that in a thoughtful and meaningful way? And to the points, it's about speed. It was brought up multiple times about the people's disregard for announcing themselves when they're passing. And what I didn't hear as much of, but is a big deal, that I've seen, is when people plug up with earphones, they don't hear people coming by. And that becomes, in and of itself, that walker creates another dangerous hazard to it. I think this is a discussion about how do we manage our trails and manage speed. And we know it's hard to enforce. We've heard that from our police department, but we've got to get our hands around this, because the underpass is going to open and people are going to start showing up, and we got to get ahead of this game. And this discussion should not stop today. We need to move forward with very concrete and measurable action steps. I think we need to address, we've got a 15 mile per hour speed limit there. One of the things you could do, I think of Mansfield, how we address that and the speeding on Mansfield. What did we do? We dropped the speed limit. And I think there's an argument that we dropped the speed limit on the High Line to the point that we actually can affect people's behavior on it. And then I'm glad that Harriet is and her group is going to have a campaign, an education campaign on bicycle etiquette. We need to be thoughtful about our signs, but all this, I'm sort of rambling, but these are all points that are relevant and we need to act upon them. And so I don't know, fellow counselors, if we send this back to PTRC, we get our chief and her police department involved with this, but I think there's some real validity in pushing speed limits down on that surface, specifically on the High Line. And we can see it. We've all been on the High Line. When you see a guy, it's usually a guy, and he's got his head down, and he's blowing through Cherry Hills, and he's on a 28-mile ride. And this is just a little segment, and he's irritated that there are all these people that he has to go around. And that we got to get our hands around those guys and change their behavior, or encourage them to change their own behavior. So that's those are my general comments. No real solutions there, other than I think we should take a good look at the speed limit on the canal specifically. Comments about the bridle trails, I don't think you should put bikes on there, but they're allowed now. You don't see them as much, but the concern is that it's going to increase with time. So regarding e-bikes versus regular bikes, I really don't have a whole lot of trouble, because they both can create trouble. But an e-bike has a greater capacity to create trouble. And so I will be advocating that we do not change our current position on e-bikes at this time. I think it's an ongoing discussion that has to take place. And I can see where it might be appropriate, that where we very specifically change and welcome it, because as my friends have told me, hey, the reality is e-bikes are here to stay. It is a trend. It is not a fad. And 50% of the bike sales are going to be e-bikes soon. And so I just want to be thoughtful about it. That's all, Russell.
Sure. Dahl, do you want to respond to the speed issue? Because you said you kind of removed it from your consideration, but you must have talked about it, I imagine. So what was the discussion?
We did, Mayor and Councillor Gallagher. We've had extensive conversations about speed. And when I say we removed it, I don't mean that it wasn't a part of the discussion, but we didn't want to attribute all speed issues to e-bikes, because I think that was an unfair characterization, because I think, as Councillor Gallagher pointed out, there are people on pedal bikes who can fly through the village just as much as somebody on an e-bike. And so, while they weren't completely separate, we didn't want that to be the only reason we made the decision we did. And that's why I said we kind of delineated those two. I 100% hear what you are saying. And quite frankly, it has been a concern of all of the commissioners on the Parks and Trails. We have heard a number of complaints, and they feel like they're growing. And I think it's because more and more people are out on the trails because of COVID, and now people are commuting via bike and things like that. We are hearing a lot of concerns about speed on our trails, specifically the Highline Canal, because it is kind of that commuter pass through of the village versus our bridle trails and things like that. I took some notes on your comments, and I will bring them back to the commission to have a conversation about what can we do and what recommendations can we make to kind of affect change on our trails. Because I agree with you. I think it's an etiquette issue. And so a lot of that has to do with education and things like that. But, what I don't know is the etiquette could be with our own village residents. It could also be with outside individuals who are passing through. And so trying to figure out how do we best educate people who are entering our village and on our rules, and should the speed limit be dropped, and, can we travel with only one headphone in versus two, so that you can hear when somebody says on your left, or whatever we need to do. So I guess in response, I don't really necessarily have an answer, but I have taken your comments and I will take them back to the commission to have a discussion, and I can work with Emily on trying to work with the commission to put forth some recommendations to council to move forward.
Thank you very much. Hey, Chief Tovre, what's the practicality of, can you change the speed? Yeah, we can change the speed limit. We could push it down from 15 to, I think if you did change the speed limit, you may get a behavior change as well. If they knew it was a 10-mile speed limit. And, if you could address enforceability, which the two officers who addressed PTRC, it sounds like it's a very difficult thing to do.
Yes, I'm not going to say that it's going to be something that would be easy to do. I think that what you can do is the stretch of trail that goes through the village. Are there particular areas, like we have particular areas inside the city, that would require more patrol than other areas? I don't know. From the complaints that maybe PTRC is getting, if we can maybe narrow those down, just like we narrow issues down with other traffic things, maybe we can do that. I don't know if it's allowed to alter the trail. I mean, I don't want to suggest speed humps or things like that, but what does a calming of that look like if the issue grows high enough that we want to look at things like that? But as everything in the city, right, we have to share the resources of what's out there. We can certainly prioritize. The police department, obviously, we're very sensitive about the summertime and what summertime brings with bicycles. As a staff, we've been discussing it already, quite frankly, from a drive that I took before the big snowstorm. I was really very surprised by the amount of bicycles and motorcycles that were out at the very early part of March, especially out west here where I live. So, you know, it's not impossible, but it certainly is going to take some thought, and we'll have to decide what resources we need to apply to it.
Chief, may I ask a clarifying question? Because we had some questions at the commission meeting in regards to the ability for your officers to enforce speed limits on like the Highline Canal and things of that nature. Are they able to do that under the code that you all work under?
You know, I'm going to draw in on the knowledgeable one here. If Commander Weathers can unmute himself and help me a little bit with this. We've had discussions back and forth, I think, on this, have we not, Pat?
We have. It's not under our model traffic code that we'll talk about later this evening. As far as speed limits set up there and enforcing that, you're going to have an actual ordinance that will set speed limits, at least in my opinion, I should say, speed ordinance which would enable us to enforce up there. Other than that, we can just go straight through the city code and have an ordinance there and be able to issue cite a violation at that time.
I think something that might have been confusing too, after talking to the two sergeants, is if you have somebody somebody injures somebody, say on a bicycle, and you go and you do an investigation, there are probably criminal sites to go with, should it be extraordinarily, somebody is just, you can prove that it was negligent in some way. There are some sites like that, but you know, again, it depends on the investigation, the type of investigation. Is it reckless endangerment? Is it, you know, a lot of things, and you'd have to try to match it to whatever statute you're looking at. So I think, Commissioner, that was probably a piece of a little bit of confusion that I understood from the two sergeants, but like the commander is saying, the speed, just speed in and of itself is what he explained.
Okay. That
Does
clarifies
that help?
it.
Does that help, or just
It does.
really I muddied your waters tonight?
No,
right?
that clarifies it. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
Thanks, Mike. Mayor
Yeah.
Pro Tem Brown.
Thank you, first of all, to PTRC for taking this effort on. It has been hanging out there for quite some time. And I know that it's, you know, it's always challenging when you touch on a nerve that's close to people's hearts. And so, and I respect that everyone that works in these capacities for the city is our volunteers. And so I just really appreciate you guys taking that on and being so thoughtful and diligent about it. I do agree that it seems like the comments were sort of overwhelming, and that does carry a lot of weight for me. And I also, there are a couple of things that I try to keep pulling myself back and looking at the big picture. I know that the vast majority of concern is about the High Line, but that is only one trail through Cherry Hills Village, and we have a lot of other trails. And we have to remember that when we pass ordinances, they are citywide. It's not just the High Line. We do have some trails that are extremely narrow. We have some trails that, are certainly not even paved, but they don't even have crusher fines. They're just dirt tracks, down a road. So we have to be cognizant that when we talk about this, we're talking about all of those things. And I also share the concern as I know you have little kids, Stephanie. I have younger kids as well. And just the e-scooters and the hoverboards. And so it's not even just e-bikes. It's all of those devices that I do have concern about. Well, if we allow that, then how do we not allow the hoverboards? And so I think it's probably, without some burning reason to make a change, I think perhaps staying the course for now is a good idea. I also agree that what I heard in these letters is not as much a specific concern about e-bikes as much as it is speed and the way people are using the trail in what our residents perceive as a dangerous manner. And I think it does have potential to be dangerous. I love the idea of enforcement, but again, I pull myself back. There are people in my district in particular who have been yelling for years about speed enforcement on the major streets in our area, Mansfield and Dahlia. And I think it would be very hard for me to say, we're going to, commit these financial resources or these police resources to enforcement on trails before we're going to commit them to enforcement of speed limits on our streets that are excessively dangerous, over 60 miles an hour on residential streets in some cases. So I'm always cognizant that there are competing resources, and absolutely, it would be wonderful if we could have a whole bicycle force out there. I guess one thing that I would like to see someone pursue, and maybe it's PTRC, I believe it was former council member Alex Brown who suggested that, maybe there's an opportunity for some sort of citizen-led patrol on our trails. And that might be an idea worth pursuing in some way. But, there are always competing resources. It would be wonderful. I'm not sure that I see that being feasible in our future. But I definitely think, to Mike's point, that we should, have that discussion. What can we do to try to make those trails a safer place? And whether it's enforcement, whether it's, trail modifications, as the chief suggested, I don't think we can do that on the High Line, but we might be able to do it on some of our other trails, like over by Little Dry Creek and Woody Hollow. I don't know, but I think those conversations probably should proceed. Is it more signage? Is it better signage, as former Mayor Chrisman suggested? All those ideas should be out on the table, and then, what the resources required are, and whether we can, do all of them, do some of them, do whatever. So I think that would be great if the PTRC could kind of toss those ideas around as well.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I appreciate that feedback.
Great. Councillor Wheel.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I think I'd certainly echo the prior comments. I really want to thank the community at large for all of the input. It is really great to get feedback, both pro and con, and I think it was very thoughtful. I also think the deliberations by PTRC were equally thoughtful, and I'm certainly comfortable with the conclusion that they came to. I do think Mike touched on the right issue, which is it's about speed. It may also be about e-bikes in that they're heavier and they're more inertia. But the speed issue, before we worry about dropping the speed limit, I'm not even sure that the problem may be people going a lot more than 15 miles an hour or being aloof, which, I think maybe we should probably address enforcement, whether it's education, signage, or policing the trails, and kind of work that a little bit before and secondarily, we can ask a question about reducing the speed limit. And I think one other thing, aside from all the good feedback from the community, it just doesn't feel consistent with master plan and all the words in there, semi-rural, bucolic, all of that, having a bunch of e-bikes zooming up and down the trail just doesn't feel consistent with that perspective. So I thank you for all the good work, everybody, and the good input.
Thank you, Councillor Wheel. Councillor Safabi.
Thank you, Mayor. So, when this came, the package was dropped off on Thursday, I started actually doing a little bit of a research on the internet and try to educate myself a little bit, and maybe some of this information is helpful for some of the other folks on the call. Again, I looked at this just like you guys in two fashion. One was noise, the other one was the speed. And when I look at the regular bikes versus e-bikes, I start comparing and seeing what kind of studies have been done that compares the noise level between regular bikes. And I can tell you I didn't come across any studies that I consider well-controlled studies. With that being said, there were studies, for example, if you take a regular bike, take it upside down, you basically turn the wheel and then you let the wheel go. That generates about 75 to 85 decibel of noise when the tire is just going around, 75 to 85. Then if you look at the studies that are done on e-bikes, on multiple different e-bikes, and they have looked at them if they're going up the hill, if the engine is heated up, if the engine is old versus new, the studies show that the noise level is somewhere between, depending on the study, somewhere between 70 to 85, the same as regular bikes. So from a noise perspective, I did not at least come across anything that would differentiate between the level of noise between an e-bike versus regular bike. True or not, I don't know. I don't own an e-bike. When a bike passes me, I just try for them not to hit me. I don't look to see if they're e-bike or regular bike. Therefore, I don't think there's a noise differential. So the next step I looked at was I tried to better understand the speed of a regular bike versus e-bikes. If you look at, and again, none of these are very scientific. These are ranges that I will give you. If you look at the beginner cyclist, I don't know how you define that, but a beginner cyclist can go between 10 to 14 miles per hour, 10 to 14. A more experienced rider, not very good, but the more experienced rider can go between 15 to 18 miles an hour. So somebody who knows how to ride a bicycle is a little bit, has been doing it maybe for a couple of years, not in a rush. They're basically already going over our speed limit of 15 miles per hour. I'm not an experienced biker. When I go on a trail, when I'm going down the hill, I know I'm trying to pick up inertia because I know a little uphill coming up. So I'm exceeding 15 miles per hour. And when I'm going up the hill, I probably go below 15 miles per hour. And if you look at the e-bikes, they are hovering around the same 20 miles an hour, usually. They're usually 15 to 20 miles an hour. That's where how fast they're going. So an e-bike, if you believe these studies out there, is going at the speed limit of somebody that is on a regular bike that is not a racer. It's an average biker on our trail. And in essence, all of them are going over the 15 mile per hour speed limit in essence. They're breaking the law. So, it all comes back to the speed. You guys are all talking about it. I'm putting some numbers around it. In terms of, by the way, I'm not here to tell you that if I'm pro e-bike or anti e-bike. I think it was well said by Mike and everybody else that this is a very important topic. We do need to discuss it. I'm glad PTRC is working on it, but I don't want to go ahead and make this a e-bike versus regular bike. I think this is going to be a speed issue. This focus is not noise. It's not e-bike versus regular bike. It's a speed issue. So if we can focus on the speed, then what is it that we need to do in order to manage it? Remember now, there's etiquette when people are going and walking their dog to pick up after their dog. Some people pick it up, always. Some people, they pick it up if you're staring at them. Some people, when they walk at 10 o'clock at night, they look around, they don't realize I'm looking out of my window, and still they don't pick it up. So it's just, it comes back to etiquette. I do, as I was listening to Mayor Chrisman, I agree. I think it comes about etiquette. We need to go ahead and teach people that, don't go so fast. What is that, a speed limit? I don't know if it's 15 or 20 or whatever it is, but it can be what it is in the village right now. I actually, when I go walk on a trail, I am scared in some areas that I'm going to get hit by a bike. And sometimes these bikes, especially if there are 2 or 3 people walking on each side and they try to maneuver right in between you, they get pretty close to you. They sometimes miss me or other people by a matter of few inches, and I guarantee you they're going over 20, 25 miles per hour. So I am more about, again, I don't have a solution just like everybody else. I think we should focus on this speed. I think we should not necessarily differentiate between e-bike versus regular bikes. Whatever we come up, it got to be applicable, the speed limit that we come up, whatever solution we come up with, or whatever law enforcement or enforcing that we want to do, it got to be applicable to both. And the only sort of a question that I have, and maybe Chief or Commander, you can address that. Personally, when I'm actually driving in the street on a car, and there are those little detection systems that it says, oh, you're going 24 miles per hour, you're going 40 miles per hour. It actually wakes me up, and it's like, I am going 3, 4, 5 miles over the speed limit. That is, to me, I find that very effective. Is this something that we can actually put the smaller version of that on the trails for bikes? Would that work? Are there such a things for bicycles? And can it be run on a solar power? And can it be in a tasteful fashion that we just don't put a bunch of these speed detection systems throughout the trail, that it just doesn't make it look any different? So that's sort of a question that I have for you. If there is such a device, that's the only thing that comes to my mind as a solution. With that being said, that's all my comments.
Actually, do you want to get a response from the chief? I don't know if you wanted to or.
Well, just really quickly, I think that those devices do exist. I think that the better expert about those would be Jay or somebody from his staff with regard to signage like that. I'm trying to think of the trails that I've ridden, if I've ever seen a sign like that with regard to bicycles. I'm not coming up with one, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. And then, of course, it would be, where do you put them? And then the light from them, could cause people problems. Would be something I think you'd have to look at.
They do exist specific for bicycles, and those are some of what Chief mentioned are some of the issues that we've talked about a little bit with PTRC and internally, especially on the High Line, trying to find a good spot where it will pick up the speeds of people on the High Line, but it's off the trail enough that it won't cause a hazard by being there, was something that we had discussed.
I had a
Yeah,
question.
Councilor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I was a little confused and I had a note on it and forgot to mention it. It seems like there's clarity that we have a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit, but then when I heard Commander Weathers, it sounded like, well, or I don't remember who, maybe it was Chief, but some combination. It sounded like, well, we might have to look to other issues or other infractions, like if it was bodily injury or recklessness or whatever. Where is the speed limit coming from?
Sorry. The speed limit is in the city right-of-way section of the municipal code, in the public properties section in chapter 11. So it appears there as it relates to trails, but I don't believe there's anything that would help the officers enforce it, if I have that correct, Chief and Commander.
Well, and I don't want to bog the meeting down, to be honest with that question, but it does seem like that's that's important to clarify. Is there a law that says, an ordinance that says here that we do have speed limits? And if there is, then maybe there are no consequences for breaking them, and maybe that's where we need the ordinance. I don't know, but it was a little confusing to me. So
I think our city attorney wanted to jump in, so maybe. Oh, you're on mute, Kathy.
I am on mute, and it's usually a good thing when your attorney's on mute. I have not researched this particular question in advance, and Chris probably saw my eyes and face lighting up, but to echo Ms. Black, section 11.3.140, bicycle and equestrian safety regulations, states that all bicyclists and equestrians entering any park or trail, which is defined, I believe, in that section, parks are, will be subject to a speed limit of 15 miles per hour. Plus, they must ride in a safe and controlled manner while in the vicinity of pedestrians, and bicyclists must yield right of way to all equestrians and pedestrians. So that is definitely in the ordinance, and in the code. And section 11.3.20 of your code states that it's unlawful for any person to fail to observe or refuse to obey any lawful rule or regulation of any sign posted in any city park or any city trail. And without speaking too much more, I would imagine you could write a citation just on violation of that into municipal court. I don't know how often it's done, but there are limitations in your code and enforcement mechanisms currently available through the legal process.
Let me add a comment. I think that's, if I may. Look, if you basically, I'm driving and I'm speeding, if a policeman stops me, they say, you're going 50 miles in a 40-mile-per-hour zone. I probably will agree, or because in the moment police light will come up, I'm going to look at my speedometer. I'm going to be, I'm going, over speed, or no, I'm actually okay. So there's a speedometer there that I can look at. 99% of these bikes, I guarantee you, there is no speedometer. So if you actually stop anybody on the trail and say, how fast are you going? From a 9-year-old kid to a, older man or gentleman or woman, and they just don't know. They're going, they can tell you, well, they're going maybe over 15 or about 30 or about 20. I mean, we're just not trained on these bikes to know how fast we're going on a regular bike. For most of us, we're just going to get to our destination, and we get tired, we slow down. When we're not tired, it's down the hill, we go faster. So to me, this idea of if you change the speed limit to 10 versus 15 versus 20, does it have an impact? I personally don't think so. There might be studies out there that they they show us better what that will do. But I really think that it comes down to the signages, to these, training people, you're not this speed when they come to it, the etiquette. I just think that's what, if you're in if you have a half of the bikers are following and they're going slower, I think the other biker is going to start paying more attention, going slower. Just like, when a pack of car go fast all together or slow down together. So anyway, I think it's education and the signage, in my opinion. Back to you.
All right, thank you. I think looks.
Yeah, sorry, Russell.
Councilor Brown.
There was one thing that I had made notes about that I forgot to mention, and that is the concern about increased commuters once we have these underpasses. And did I understand correctly that the e-bikes are currently allowed on paved trails that are sort of part of the right of way? So that would include like Colorado. Okay, wait, I see Emily like, so.
Just because trails are also right of way, so it gets a little fuzzy. So trails that are bike trails that are immediately adjacent to the road. So the ones that are, that have the green paint now, if you're going down
Colorado.
Parts of Quincy, for example, right in front of Quincy Farm, it's part of the actual roadway. E-bikes are allowed on streets. That's considered part of the street. They would be permitted there. When the strange thing with our trails is when that paved trail leaves even Quincy, like right in front of Kent, and it's a separate, it's separated by a section of grass and some trees, then it's a trail, and then e-bikes aren't permitted. So if you were riding an e-bike through the city, you could stay on the bike lanes that are immediately adjacent, and then you would continue on Quincy roadway as you continue to travel.
So I guess that was kind of the genesis of my thought. Again, just another idea that maybe PTRC could toss around is, if we are not going to allow e-bikes, is there a possibility to identify an alternative trail for people on e-bikes, and primarily for people who are commuting and just want to get, from point A to point B, to try to reserve our trails as more of a recreational amenity and less of a bike highway? And I don't know whether we can do this or not. We'd have to look at, I know that there's a trail like that on Mansfield. It has the bike lane painted on the street. And I know Happy Canyon has a bike lane painted on the street. Could we make connections of some sort to identify, here's the commuter trail where you can take your e-bike and just hightail it straight through Cherry Hills Village without interacting, with and that could be communicated as well to our walkers and our equestrians and et cetera, that, these are the commuter trails. People are going to be riding faster. They're going to be, et cetera. So I don't know. That was my thought. Right. I don't think such a thing exists yet, but maybe it could.
Well, and Greenwood Village it would make sense to coordinate with Greenwood Village because they're in the same position. So if you did want to go north to south, what's a route that's appropriate?
For example,
just a comment.
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, just one quick comment, Al. I think there's a wonderful opportunity to coordinate with the Highland Canal Conservancy in this effort, as they're obviously doing a ton of research. They're looking at best practices across the nation, and I speak the obvious, but there it is. Sorry, Al.
Councilor Blum.
I was just going to say Clarkson would be a example of the bike path that's in the street, and they would have north-south access through Cherry Hills, for example, on Clarkson, but I don't know where that would go.
All right, I think I'll move the discussion along then, unless there's anything else. Obviously, if everybody has more thoughts, you can certainly call Chair Dahl and give her a whole list. But I think these are all great ideas. I would just sum up on a couple things. The ADA, actually the ADA, we can rely on our attorney, but ADA really affects people who are impaired by a physical disability that's a major impairment that limits a major life activity, which is walking. So really, it's a pretty broad definition, and I'm not sure how it kind of all plays into whether we need to make reasonable accommodations to allow them to, if you can't walk or you can't do it, that's something an ADA lawyer will probably need to define for us and see what we need to do. But it is a broad definition. About what you need to do about it is another question.
There's actually Mayor, I'm sorry. There's particular regulations on these power-driven mobility devices, and it has to be for mobility reasons that they need these devices. And public entities can limit which devices work and which don't, depending on the context. The city manager's office won't have to allow a golf cart or maybe a giant one of those wheelchairs, but they can allow the smaller motorized wheelchairs. Segways was really what generated, those stand-up things that people do tours on, but those are very helpful mobility devices for folks too. And that is actually cited by Department of Justice guidance on what to allow. And, e-bikes, I think Councilor Blum said it well, that trying to enforce it is going to, there's limited questions you can ask about who can use or why someone is using something, and providing, reasonable. It's been a while since I've looked at those regulations, but that's always a problem. It's less of a problem in a limited facility like a park or a city building, and a much bigger problem in the context of what we're talking about tonight. There's always the risk that anybody that's in the plaintiff's side of an ADA case could make a lot of hay, especially since they get attorney's fees if they prevail. And so it's a risk. There are organizations out there that are looking for these kinds of cases to make. So you'd want to march very carefully were you to do, or impose or think about any kind of limitations or, restrictions. But
it may be that the Highline Conservancy may have the best practices for that too. I mean, they're going to be.
They may already have that. That would be good to leverage that. Yeah.
But that's something we should be aware of. And to the ordinance issue, I think that's correct. We have cited people for golf carts on the trails. So I know and they've been brought in front of Judge Wellborn and read the Riot Act. So I think, but I do think there are some issues, and I think maybe the city attorney needs. I think we identified some months ago about enforcement of non-traffic offenses in our municipal court, and that may be another one, and we may need to look at that to see what we really can, the correct procedure that it needs to be adopted in order to be enforceable in our municipal court. So that's something I think we really should take a look at, particularly given I think the consensus here about the speed limit, and making sure that we can at least enforce it. Have the ability to enforce it in our municipal courts. So
I would agree.
I think those are all good points. Barring that though, I think we'll, if it's okay with everybody, we'll move on to the next item, which continues to, oh no, this is a new presenter. This is Commander Weathers. This is our new business, which is Council Bill 3, Series 2021, repealing and reenacting Article 1 of Chapter 8 of the Municipal Code, entitled Model Traffic Code Concerning Vehicles and Traffic, adopting by reference the 2020 edition of the Model Traffic Code for Colorado with certain amendments, and adopting penalties for violations thereof. Commander Weathers, thank you for staying with us.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Excuse me, staff is seeking approval of Council Bill 3, Series 2021, regarding adoption of the 2020 Model Traffic Code. This code is the revised edition of the 2010 Model Traffic Code that the police department is currently working off of. The Model Traffic Code basically mirrors the Colorado state statutes that govern traffic laws and regulations in Colorado, and is designed to ensure that basic driving rules and regulations are uniform statewide for the protection of Colorado drivers and pedestrians. The Model Traffic Code is utilized by a majority of the municipalities in Colorado. The 2020 revised edition was reviewed by the Police Department, City Attorney's Office, the Municipal Court Prosecutor, and the Public Works Director. The ordinance removes certain redundancies from the Model Traffic Code adoption and retains several changes from the city's prior adoption of the Model Traffic Code that include parking restrictions, gross vehicle and load weights limits, some offense classifications, and setting fines for violations as authorized by state statute. Staff is recommending approval of the first reading of Council Bill 3, Series 2021, concerning the adoption of the 2020 edition of the Model Traffic Code for Colorado with noted revisions. Certainly be glad to entertain any questions that you may have.
All right, thank you, Commander Weathers. I can throw it open here to any council member if you want to unmute and ask questions. This is first reading, of course. We'll have a second reading on this since it is an ordinance, change to ordinance.
Commander, this is Afshin. Just a quick question. You said this has been adopted by majority of the, I guess, district or cities. The one that have not adopted this, why not? Why have they not adopted?
Basically, Counselor, these are cities that are very, very small that really run out of the sheriff's departments in some of the rural counties that don't, but metro-wide, the big cities all the way through from Fort Collins all the way down operate and have been operating on the Model Traffic Code for years.
Great, thank you.
Any other comments?
I move to approve Council Bill 3, Series 2021, a bill for an ordinance of the City of Cherry Hills Village repealing and reenacting Article 1 of Chapter 8 of the Cherry Hills Village Municipal Code entitled Model Traffic Code Concerning Vehicles and Traffic, adopted by reference the 2020 edition of the Model Traffic Code for Colorado with certain amendments, and adopting penalties for violations thereof on first reading, and set the public hearing and second and final reading for the April 6, 2021 City Council meeting.
Second.
You have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Laura, I'll take a roll call, please.
Counselor Safavi,
Yes.
Counselor Wheel,
Yes.
Counselor Brown,
Yes.
Counselor Gallagher,
Yes.
Counselor Blum.
Yes.
That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. And we'll revisit that on second reading. Okay, that's all the business that we have. We can move to reports. I have some brief reports. First of all, I'd just like to note that I was very pleased by all the interest in the Highline Canal. I think the one message we ought to take from the Highline Canal and the e-bike issue is how important the trails are to our community. I mean, holy cow, talk about the interest of our residents and citizens in this issue. It just tells you the priority of what they see as important in living in our community and where they place the Highline Canal in our trail system. Wow, a lot of letters, and I read them all, and they are very thoughtful and very interesting and very well done and passionate. So that was very interesting. I want to also talk about the snowstorm. I've received calls of, I wanted to let everybody know that I've received calls praising our staff for the way they've done the snow this time, which I thought was, I was very pleased not to have the other kinds of calls. So this is a great call. In fact, some residents on Dahlia saying, you know, we hate the speeding traffic, but we love the snowplows because we're a priority street. So there you go. Everything's a trade-off in life. I also want to specifically, we had a resident on Southmore Lane who called, and he was, as everyone knows, the procedure is to plow the middle of the roads first and then come back later and do the cleanup work. And that was, they plowed the middle and they locked him in, and he needed to get out to go. He was one of our rest is more experienced residents, and he called, and he called back, and after they came through the second time when they cleared his driveway on the second pass, he called back and he was just passionate. High praise for the snowplow driver. I wanted to say that to the city manager about how nice the snowplow driver was. I don't know who he was, but they said he was he said he was the nicest snowplow driver he's ever seen, and he couldn't say enough about how nice he was and how he was talked to him, and he was very helpful. So kudos to them. If you could pass that along to the team, I would appreciate it. March 4th, I attended the Arapahoe County Transportation Forum. The city manager was with me. That was that forum is allocates by priority spending on highway project, mostly highway projects in Arapahoe County. We have a priority list, and the issue here was there's COVID money, federal COVID money coming in that's required to be spent pretty quickly. And the issue is who's ready to kind of jump in and start using that money. And so that was a discussion, and what process it would be used to take those on. And it didn't really affect any projects that are on our community or that border us, but there were some important ones. Santa Fe and Mineral was a big one that Littleton was trying to do. And kind of the issue that was involved with is that they weren't really in a place to say we can go ahead and finish this year because they hadn't even looked at it. I mean, they're on the list, they're on the top of the list, but they hadn't, they're waiting. Usually the TIPS funding comes gradually and you get some notice and you do your work and preparation on it. But this is money that needed to be spent this year or next year because it's federal money designed to get things moving. So a lot of discussion among the municipalities about who can go forward and what the formula is going to be. And that was done. I've also suggested that Randy may be a good one, a counselor to have on this committee, because they talk so much about DRCOG. And it really does interplay with how DRCOG spends. We spend a lot of time talking about what DRCOG is doing and their formulas and how that affects Arapahoe County. So if people are okay with that, I'd like to see if Randy can't start attending those. And I talked to Councilor Wheel, and he has agreed. So in the future, I'd like to see if everyone's okay with that. I'd like to do that and pass that off to Randy. The mayor's lunch that we had last week was canceled because there was a mayor's caucus meeting that was intervened and was over the top of that. So actually not a lot to report on from the Metro Mayor's Caucus right now. And one last point on COVID, I've been on calls and everything is getting better. And an interesting thing that today I've learned from a reliable source that the Swedish COVID ICU unit is closed. They have no patients in the Swedish ICU with COVID. So, they have COVID in the hospital, but as far as the ICU ventilators and all that, they don't have a patient. So that is wide open. So that's good, good signal of things to come. And certainly all the discussion is how soon we can all get kind of back to normal and how soon the vaccines can be rolled out and everybody can get vaccinated. So that's all good news. That's my report. Members of council, Councilor Blum.
Yes, I like to echo what the mayor said about the participation on that e-bike. I mean, we read those this morning. I didn't think there was anybody in the city who didn't write in. I thought that was great. Report a couple of meetings that we've had. Katie and I and the staff had three different meetings with PR firms to discuss our potential ballot issues relating to some of the tax. We really have three tax issues that we need to deal with. And, I think it's very informative. I think that it's something that we come back to council and have a council discussion on how we proceed or if we proceed with these people. One takeaway I did have from that was, because I was gung-ho to try and get this thing on the ballot this year. I think it's going to take 2 years to do it right. You get one bite at the apple and we want to make sure it's done right. So that was one takeaway from that. Randy and I and staff had a meeting with Zayo yesterday where they're still working on a possibility of maybe doing some small cell towers and maybe working with AT&T. No real progress, although they are still working on it. We did set a meeting. In fact, I just got a text while we're in the meeting that they've set the next meeting with Zayo on April 7th to see if we can make some progress on that. And staff's looking at our own right-of-ways to see what we can do to maybe help out on that. So some very important meetings I think we had. I think they're informative. And if Katie or Chris or Randy, I think they can talk if they want to expand on that. But that's my report.
Hey,
Councilor Gallagher.
Al, a quick question. Was there recommendation to put more than one of those issues on a ballot at a time?
Well, we didn't get that far. I mean, there's really, we're looking, Mike, at 3 specific issues. One of them, potentially if, and we'd have to talk to Kathy about that, the issue relates to the sales tax. Are we really prevented from that? Is that something that we really need to have a legal discussion on as to whether we can avoid having to put that one on? There was no definitive discussion of whether we put them, whether it's 2 or 3, we put them on a one ballot issue or we do separate ballot issues. But those are all things that I think we need to discuss over the next several months and make a decision on that.
Thank you.
Councilor Gallagher? Okay, Councilor Brown.
I would just, Al covered it pretty well, but Mike, in response to your question, we spoke with 3 different firms and we got 3 different opinions, right? And we weren't paying them for anything. This was just kind of an introductory. So I don't think anything they offered was, they didn't have nearly enough information to make very specific recommendations. But in kind of broad stroke consensus, I do think that all of them in some way said taking a little more time to do the process would probably have a better chance of success. There was, one who said, no, we just absolutely can't do it this year. There was one who's like, well, yeah, maybe you could get it done. But generally speaking, I think they all agreed that having more time to reach out to the community and get citizen input and get people involved would be better. And they had differing opinions about, odd numbered years versus even numbered years versus doing them one at a time, multiple things together. Some of them had even other suggestions, so all of that stuff, it comes down to strategy, and that's exactly what we would need. That's exactly what we need help doing in the end. And so I think probably next steps are for at least Al and I and Chris probably to maybe schedule a Zoom call to collect our feedback and thoughts about the whole process and come up with what we would recommend to you as the next step. And that is all that I have to report, except for that I'm glad to hear the snow removal went very well. I wouldn't know.
Oh, that's sad.
Since Mr. Mayor, since we're on the topic of those interviews, there was 2 other points, Al and Katie, that I would like to just throw in there. The one that Katie could not be more right. They had different strategies for doing different parts. They sort of had different philosophies. The one universal truth that they all had, though, was the importance of doing your market research. And they were all extremely comfortable with firms like themselves or other firms. One of the folks we interviewed isn't available. He was just providing sort of pro bono suggestions, and he was of the same. He had no business to gain, and they were very clear. It's all completely above board and extremely advisable to do market research on the front end. So do some analytics. And, some of them thought a committee might work, while others thought that a focus group approach might work, while others thought that it really could be a city council led effort. In fact, those are the 3 models. I just laid it out for you. The point is, regardless of which model you choose, though, they were in total agreement to really have a 2-stage process where the city can really do this market research side on the front end. And that's where you could test. Do you want to just do 1 question, or do you want to do 3 questions? What are the analytics? What are the impacts from a budget perspective? To really get to a point where there would be a recommendation about, do you, city council, want to put something on the ballot? Then at that point, the city council and staff are hands off, and there would theoretically be a citizens for ballot measure 1 or whatever it might be, who then take over, and we completely step aside at that point. So that would be the one thing I guess I would sort of add on to the two statements before. There was sort of a universal consensus on that side of it, and we even heard from one of them that really, from a contract perspective, the first part with the city might even be the cheaper of the two, and that they could help with the fundraising through the citizen committee that we'd have no part of to help pay their bills for the second part. And so, I guess that was one of the biggest questions I had, was the process. What would the process be? And the process side, I guess I thought, and Al and Katie and Jessica can chime in here too, but I thought that there was consensus on that part of it. Now, what techniques, all over the map, but the steps were relatively the same.
And Chris, if I could just, one further thing on that note. Yes, everybody was in agreement about the two-step process. And that's, sort of as we alluded to, once an issue is on the ballot, the city in an official capacity can't do we can't spend any money, we can't use city time, etc. However, and I think this needs to be extremely clear to everyone on council, that it is not that we wash our hands of it and someone magically steps in to take the ball across the finish line. I believe that every person we talked to believed that council members as individuals would be out knocking on doors, talking to people, having meetings as your individual person. And this is, I think you have to have that in the back of your mind, right? Our community doesn't traditionally do that. Not many of us have ever gone and knocked on doors, cold called people. And so I don't want anyone to think that there's some magic ballot issue fairy there that we're going to decide what it needs to be and we hand it off and they just go do it. That no one suggested that is a model that works.
And that did come up a lot when we talked about the timing, because most of their feedback was, look, this is a commitment. And if you tried to go this year, you can just basically clear the decks about anything else, both at a staff and council level, because until August, that's pretty much all you're going to be doing. And it may make sense to spread that out and give yourselves time to breathe to do other things, because it is such a commitment. So anyway, we can go back to reports, Mayor. I just wanted to add those couple of nuggets in on top of the other.
Sure. Thank you. That's very helpful. Councilor Wheel.
Thank you. As long as we're on the topic, let me pick up where Chris left off. I spent a couple of hours with Jessica, and I have to thank her for excellent work and being very generous with her time. I'd encourage, I'd like to see us all look at, not at this moment, but whether it's the group that's working on this or the counselors at large, take a look at some of the work we did, because it's kind of interesting and it may redefine the problem. More specifically, we took the long range forecast and we said, okay, there's sort of three pieces to this, which is the sales tax, the use tax, and the parks fund versus general fund issue. And when we started looking at those one at a time, if we were to get the sales tax passed, that pushes out that year that we're in violation of the charter way out. And further, if the use tax was passed, that basically puts it out of the long range time horizon. It also has the effect of balancing the parks and the general fund, which is kind of interesting, because that sort of eliminates possibly one of the three pieces and it's only secondhand information, was that some of these consultants had some Tabor lawyers on staff who raised the question about whether we actually needed to go to the voters for this issue or not. Not a matter of trying to be obscure, but just procedure. So on the sales tax itself. And I think and I know Kathy's done a lot of work, and I think she believes, and I don't know the words of any of this. I think there's a belief that we have to do that, but I think we ought to be real sure that we do have to do that, because we may be down to one ballot issue rather than three, and our finances are in terrific shape. But I think if you see the work and how it plays out over time, and take it one step at a time, we may come to a different definition of the problem. And of course, that would affect the solution. So I offer that up to all of you, and maybe it's something we can take up on the agenda as you guys, Chris and Mayor Pro Tem, as you guys think about the agenda for next meeting. Let's see, what else did I have? Dr. Cog, we talked about greenhouse gas rulemaking in the working session 2 weeks ago, and some preliminary ideas for MetroVision. The meeting tomorrow night, we'll talk about the formal public hearing on 2050 MetroVision regional plan and the associated air quality conformity determinations. And we'll also have a public hearing on a draft for the TIP, or transportation improvement programs. That's the news from Dr. Cog. One other thing, I also spent some time, and I have to start with an apology, which is never a good way to do it, but I was late on my red lines on the RFP. And I changed, as I read it, I have to say my first reaction was 28, I think when I went to print it, it was like 28 pages or something, the draft. And I thought, excellent piece of work. Very well done. Very well done. On the other hand, I was thinking that we were collectively in a place that was a little simpler than that. And so rather than try to do a bunch of edits, I more or less myself, and I got a lot of help from several other people. There's another draft of the RFP, which I would characterize as much shorter, like 6 pages, probably less prescriptive might not be the right word, but it's more open-ended, I think would be the best way to describe it. So it provides the opportunity for people to come in and provide a whole bunch of different proposals for whether it's ownership or programming or maintenance or funding or any of the rest of it. I think it opens the door wider for respondents, and I think that'll help us in terms of securing or procuring a bunch of greater number of respondents and give us more to evaluate as we go forward. So Chris has that in his hands. He's going to work with staff a bit, and then we'll see what they think and see if that works a little, helps us move things forward. And that, aside from adding my thanks to Mr. J for the great snow plowing job, it takes that takes care of my report.
Thank you, Councilor Wheel. City Manager, you want to jump in?
I just, on the Quincy Farm RFP, we did just get that from Randy. We are meeting tomorrow to try, because staff had been working since we heard all the feedback from City Council. And so we had sort of another version in the can that was different than the version you all saw. And so I think some of the changes we made were similar to a lot of the changes that Councilor Wheel sent us. But there's, I think, some differences as well. And we just have to spend some time comparing the new staff version that's based on council's comments with the version that Councilor Wheel sent over. As soon as we can get that hashed out, and Councilor Wheel, it may involve a follow-up call with you just to talk about a couple of items. But as soon as we get that hashed out, our goal is to still keep this on April 6th and send you all the updated version that hopefully synthesizes as much as possible from Councilor Wheel's version and the council informing staff for updated staff version that none of you have seen yet. So hopefully we can get that out to you all the next couple of days.
Absolutely happy to give you as much time as you'd like. So just let me know.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Wheel. Councilor Safavi.
No report, just a quick comment. Randy, I think that's great that you have spent some time with Jessica and come up with maybe done some modeling with the taxes and revenue and so on. I think it would be great, again, since you guys have already done the work, and it might not be a final solution, but I think it's really good if you guys can run it with the rest of us, and maybe again at the next council meeting or whenever time allows, and have a good discussion on that again. But I think that would be really useful. That's all from my end, Mayor.
City Manager.
Yes, a few things. First of all, some of the other directors are going to give a report, but I am going to just take a few moments to provide huge kudos to Director Goldie and Ralph and the entire streets crew. Fourth largest storm in the metro area in history. And if you drove around this morning, you'd never know it if you only looked at the streets. So, of course, there's always follow-up issues, and folks do get blocked in on their driveways, and when you got that much of a volume to push around, things like that are going to happen. But and you're always going to hear a few folks who are frustrated with that. But compared to the level of the storm, just could not be more proud, and hats off, amazing job by the whole team. So I wanted to make sure I got that in there so that Jay, you can pass that along to your whole crew. I'm not sure if council saw this, but after my report, my weekly update went out, Arapahoe County did get moved to the blue status on the dial. Again, not a huge impact for Cherry Hills Village specifically. Some of our country clubs and retail businesses, it does affect positively, but more importantly, for our residents who do business in the county, it's a big assist. We did talk a little bit about, Councilor Wheel talked about some follow-up long-range budget analysis discussion. I guess I would ask council and Mr. Mayor, you as to lead this discussion. Do we want to schedule something for that? I'm not sure if the next meeting is the best one to have that, but we can certainly take a look at the agendas and pick the best upcoming one that has some availability.
Certainly, we could certainly do a study session. I mean, a time away and have Jessica make a presentation and show us some of those options. That may be very useful.
It would be a discussion, I think less about what the official long range budget would look like and more just scenario work, doing different scenario planning just to understand what different aspects of our budget look like if you were to adjust certain variables. So it's not as much a discussion about what the long range budget should be. It's what are the biggest impacts to it, I think. Right. So yeah, we will then let us take a look and we will add that. I'll work with Laura and Jessica and we will add that to an upcoming study session. And regarding the public affairs consultant interviews that we did, Rachel Brown and Councilor Blum, Jessica and I will work to find a follow-up Zoom time, likely next week, since I know that somebody's on spring break. I don't know, I can't remember who that is, but I'm sure it's somebody important. So look for that invite for sometime next week for a Zoom. If there's times that you can't make it, let us, Jessica and I know, and we'll make sure that we get it scheduled for a time that we're all available. And then finally, we do have as a follow-up to a request from council, we do have the district attorney scheduled at a future council meeting. Laura, you might have to help me with the date, but we are confirmed. So that is all set.
Yeah, I believe it's this upcoming April 6th.
Perfect.
So we anticipate starting instead of a study session, just having a session with John then, or
We'll have a regular study session is our plan, and then he will start out the regular meeting before audience participation. We'll have him.
okay.
So he wouldn't have to be here longer than he needed to. He could know to show up right at 6:30.
Right. Okay. Anything from staff?
I have a quick, well, go ahead, Jay.
Oh.
Ladies first.
Well, all right then. Because I would like to also commend Jay and his staff. The police department, we had an operations order out for this snow that we were dealing with. It dealt with personnel, people who couldn't get to work, if people couldn't show up to work. We coordinated with fire a bit, but far and away, Jay and his staff keeping the emergency routes open for police personnel was probably the biggest thing. And I just want to say, really thank you for that. We only ended up having to tow one car from our emergency tow policy. And hopefully that person got that car picked up today. It was at Quincy University, just FYI for all of you. So thank you, Jay. I appreciate that. And then lastly, just to close out today's portion of the model traffic code, I really want to thank Kathy and her staff for working really hard with this. And truly, Pat Weathers is the one that put this whole thing together. This has not been a simple document to get through to everyone by any stretch. And he persevered through that and got it done. And I'm grateful that it's headed off to second reading. So thank you, everybody, for that. And that's all I have.
I will pass oh, go ahead. Sorry, Mayor.
No, I just said thank you, Chief. Director Goldie, you have the floor.
I will pass along the kudos to my staff. I would love to take credit for it, but Ralph Mason, who's been with the city for almost 40 years now, took over control of this storm for us. He continues to tweak everything he does. He just doesn't keep doing the same thing. If it doesn't work, he continues to do new things. We always have different operators, which is a challenge. The crews did a great job with the amount of snow we had and the wind. We had at least one pass down every city street before 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon. It took us longer than we wanted. With the weight of the snow and the amount of snow, we lost a lot of equipment. When we started the snow, we had more equipment than operators. When we ended the storm, we had more operators than equipment. So we do have a few pieces of equipment that are in the shop over at Inglewood that we will get back up and running just as soon as possible. We will continue to do cleanup, moving snow from the shady side of the street to the sunny side of the street. That will generate some calls. People don't like that, but it's the best thing we can do for everybody to get that snow out of here as soon as possible. We'll continue to widen all of the streets. And as the snow melts, that's when we'll start to see a few complaints and work orders for damage to landscaping and those type of things. We will continue to work on all those work orders and get to them just as fast as we can. And like the mayor said, we've worked really closely with the police department for, if it's a true emergency, we ask residents to call the police and then let the police give my crew the direction for real emergencies. Because sometimes people say it's, I have to get out of my driveway. And then as soon as you help them get out, they put the skis on top of their vehicle and they're trying to get up the hill. So they've been a great help making sure that the true emergencies that we move our equipment to where it needs to be. So I will again pass the kudos on to my staff, and we appreciate all of the positive comments.
City Clerk?
No report from me, thank you.
And it looks like Jessica's off, so City Attorney.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have that much to report. You can see I've been pretty busy. The model traffic code did, we worked pretty closely with the prosecutor to make sure that there were some things taken care of. And when these things come around every 8 years or 10 years or so, that takes some doing. So thanks to Commander Weathers as well for working with me on that, and my associate Sylvia, I want to give her credit. Let's see. Interesting note, and Mayor, I don't know if this came to the CML board yet, but the Colorado Municipal League Amicus Committee has been talking about a case regarding governmental immunity that will be going on appeal. Involves a sidewalk in Boulder, and it's potentially a big challenge to governmental immunity. And so with the board's approval, there will be CML backing on an appeal there on that front pretty soon. Let's see, Comcast continues to work in the background, working on other contracts. Got a couple of projects at the study session coming up next meeting. I'll be working with City Clerk Gillespie on, and I think that's it. I don't know if anybody has any questions for me. I'm happy to answer. Okay. Oh, and I did give some training to PTRC. We just went over scope, things in the code, how they assist you, and then just some refresher basics, I guess, since I don't see them too often. So that's that.
And I'll just add to there potentially some issues that we spoke with about Comcast that may need to come to council. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Well, I actually just got today the revised draft from Ken Fellman, and Director Goldie is looking at how some other communities handle some things. I know he's had his hands full last several days, and probably more than we know with all the preparation that goes into getting ready for one of these storms. But I know he's reaching out to some other communities to get some relevant information so that we can, when we get that, we'll bring it to a study session with council so that we can have clear direction for negotiations with Comcast.
Well, and that may be an executive session even more than a study session.
Correct.
It'll be
Correct.
a discussion about contract negotiations.
Correct. I misspoke. I said study session because that's on my brain. So thank you for that correction. So, all right.
Okay. I think that's it. Unless anybody else has anything, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. We got a motion. I'm sure there's lots of seconds. So everybody stay safe. And we'll see you next time.